Hi boys and girls, today I'm going to continue reading. If you remember, Lewis is going to school. Mrs. Hammerbotham said he could join the first grade and he's going into the classroom right now. Quiet children, said Mrs. Hammerbotham sternly. We'll start learning with the letter A. She picked up a piece of chalk and made a big A on the blackboard. Now you try it, Lewis. Lewis grabbed a piece of chalk in his bill and drew a perfect A, right under the one the teacher had drawn. You see, said Sam, he is an unusual bird. Well, said Mrs. Hammerbotham, A is easy. I'll give him something harder. So she wrote cat on the board. Let's see if Lewis can write cat. Lewis wrote C-A-T, cat. Well, cat is easy too, said the teacher. Cat is easy because it is short. Can anyone think of a word that is longer than the word cat? Catastrophe, said Charlie Nelson, who sat in the first row. Good, said Mrs. Hammerbotham. That's a great hard word, but does anyone know what it means? What is a catastrophe? An earthquake, said one of the girls. Correct, replied the teacher. What else? War is catastrophe, said Charlie Nelson. Correct, replied Mrs. Hammerbotham. What else is? A very small red-headed girl named Jeanie raised her hand. Yes, Jeanie, said Mrs. Hammerbotham. What is a catastrophe? In a very small, high voice, Jeanie said, when you get ready to go on a picnic with your father and mother and you make a peanut butter sandwich and jelly rolls and put them in a thermos box with bananas and an apple and some raisin cookies and paper napkins and some bottles of pop and a few hard-boiled eggs, and then you put the thermos box in your car, and just as you're starting out, it starts to rain. And your parents say there is no point in having a picnic that day because it is a catastrophe. Very good, Jeanie, said Mrs. Hammerbotham. It isn't as bad as an earthquake and it isn't as bad as war. But when a picnic gets called on account of rain, that could be a catastrophe. Anyway, catastrophe is a good word. No bird can write that word, I'll bet. If I can teach a bird to write catastrophe, it'll be big news all over sweet grass country. I'll get my picture in the newspaper. Thinking of all these things, she stepped to the blackboard and she wrote catastrophe. Okay, Lewis, let's see if you can write it too. Lewis picked up a fresh piece of chalk in his bill. He was scared. He took a good look at the word. A long word, he thought, is really no harder than a short one. I'll just copy one letter at a time and pretty soon it'll all be finished. Besides, my life is a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe to be without a voice. Then he began to write catastrophe. He wrote, making each letter very neatly. When he got to the last letter, everyone clapped and stamped their feet and banged on their desks, and one boy quickly made a paper airplane and zoomed it into the air. Mrs. Hammerbotham had a call for order. Very good, Lewis, she said. Sam, it's time you went to your own classroom. You shouldn't be in my room. Go and join the 5th grade. I'll take care of your friend, the swan. Back in his own room, Sam sat down at his desk feeling very happy about the way the things had turned out. The 5th graders were having a lesson in math, and their teacher, Miss Annie Snug, greeted Sam with a question. Miss Snug was very young and very pretty. Sam, if a man can walk 3 miles in 1 hour, how many miles can he walk in 4 hours? It would depend on how tired he got after the first hour, replied Sam. The other students roared, and Miss Snug rapped for order. Sam is quite right, she said. I never looked at this problem this way before. I always supposed that man could walk 12 miles in 4 hours, but Sam may be right. The man may not be feeling well. He may not be spunky after the first hour. He may drag his feet. He may slow down. Albert Bigelow raised his hand. My father knew a man who tried to walk 12 miles, and he died of a heart attack, said Albert. Goodness, said the teacher. I suppose that could happen too. Anything can happen in 4 hours, said Sam. If man might develop a blister on his heel, he may not make it, or he might find some berries growing along the road and stop to eat them. That would slow him up, even if he wasn't tired or didn't have a blister. It would indeed, agreed the teacher. Well, children, I think we have all learned a great deal about math this morning, thanks to Sam Beaver. And now, here is a problem for one of the girls in the room. If you're feeding a baby from a bottle and you give the baby 8 ounces of milk in one feeding, how many ounces of milk would the baby drink in 2 feedings? Well, Linda Staples raised her hand. About 15 ounces, she said. Why is that? Asked Miss Snug. Well, why wouldn't the baby drink 16 ounces? Because he spills a little out of his mouth each time, said Linda. It runs out of the corners of his mouth and gets on his mother's apron. By this time, the class was howling and laughing so loudly that the math lesson had to be thrown out. But everyone had learned how careful you have to be when dealing with numbers. So the next chapter is called Love, and I'm going to read that to you shortly. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how it's been so difficult, I know for many of you, especially when you're answering questions. I'd like you to keep a couple of things in mind, especially the way we learned in class when we read the question and we carefully looked for text evidence and we restated. So what I'm going to be doing is looking forward to seeing how well you do in remembering all the strategies that I taught you, because I know that you all remember this, and I hope that when I do post more questions that you will be very detailed so I know that you are understanding what Ms.Bullis is reading. Okay, boys and girls, looking forward to the next chapter.